The heavy concrete walls of the basement seemed to actively sweat in the dead of winter, weeping thick drops of frigid moisture that smelled intensely of black mildew, forgotten rot, and decades of silent decay. I sat hunched over in a threadbare, faded armchair, the singular, miserable piece of furniture my daughter-in-law had graciously permitted me to salvage, after she kicked out my personal belongings from the master suite upstairs, shivering violently under a thin, scratchy wool blanket that provided virtually no warmth against the biting chill rising up from the unfinished foundation below. My name is Jerry Dawson. I am 71 years old, and for 40 unbroken years, I served as a senior forensic accountant and fraud investigator for the federal courts and the state's largest financial institutions. I spent my entire professional career systematically tracing hidden assets across labyrinthine offshore bank statements, exposing complex gaslighting schemes constructed by white-collar criminals, and tracking illicit wealth hidden behind dense corporate veils. Yet, tonight, I was trapped like a discarded beast inside the subterranean belly of the very brick house I had personally paid off with the sweat of my own brow. For 5 long, agonizing years, my daughter-in-law, Monica Dawson, had systematically stripped away my dignity, my liberty, and my financial autonomy, relegating me to this freezing, windowless tomb after she kicked out every vestige of my authority while paraded across the polished hardwood floors upstairs like an absolute queen, living on my pension and retirement savings. Monica was the quintessential embodiment of an entitled child by marriage, a calculating gold digger who had perfected the art of suburban deception until it shone like polished silver. To the affluent neighbors on our tree-lined cul-de-sac, to our family physician, and to the well-meaning members of the local church committee, she presented herself as a living, breathing martyr of Christian charity. She regaled anyone who would listen with dramatic, tear-stained narratives about how she had selflessly sacrificed her youth and social calendar to care for her ailing, senile father-in-law after her husband's tragic, untimely demise. She told them with a practiced, sorrowful sigh that my mind was rapidly deteriorating, that I suffered from advanced, aggressive dementia, and that I required round-the-clock supervision because I had become prone to violent, paranoid delusions. She painted me as a pitiable, broken burden who could no longer distinguish between day and night, a man who needed to be locked away for his own safety and the safety of the household. The reality of my captivity, however, was infinitely more sinister, far simpler, and dripping with financial malice. I was not senile. My cognitive faculties had not slipped by a single millimeter, and my memory remained as razor-sharp and unyielding as a steel ledger. I was simply an inconvenient budget line item that Monica desperately wanted to erase from her balance sheet. I was a living, breathing obstacle standing between her and the complete, unhindered liquidation of my remaining savings account, my trust fund contributions, and the equity locked inside my home. Every single evening, as the shadows lengthened across the tiny rusted window well situated near the ceiling of my concrete prison, my dinner arrived on a scratched plastic tray. Tonight was no exception. I stared down into the chipped ceramic bowl filled with lukewarm, watery potato soup, watching a thin film of starch coagulate across the surface. Monica insisted to our family doctor that strict sodium restriction was medically imperative to manage my blood pressure, but I knew the dark, unvarnished truth. She withheld every ounce of seasoning and warmth because she actively hoped I would lose my appetite entirely, wither away from severe malnutrition, and fade into a quiet, convenient death before the winter ended. She wanted my body to give up so she could collect the final remnants of my inheritance and clear the property without going through the messy, prolonged legal mechanics of a formal, institutional commitment. In the corner of the room, perched precariously upon a stack of discarded cinder blocks, sat a small 13-inch cathode ray television set that buzzed with static whenever the furnace kicked on. It was my sole remaining aperture to the outside world, a flickering window into a society that had long since forgotten my name. Monica strictly controlled the master cable box locked away upstairs in her study, dictating with authoritarian precision what channels streamed into the basement. Ordinarily, she subjected me to endless loops of mind-numbing children's cartoons, mundane home shopping networks, or decades-old sitcom reruns, consciously intending to infantilize my intellect and accelerate the psychological decay she claimed I suffered from. But tonight, whether through sheer carelessness, a momentary slip of her thumb on the remote control, or the quiet intervention of some long-overdue cosmic justice, the local evening news broadcast from the Pacific Northwest affiliate flickered across the curved glass screen. The news desk announced an exclusive live report broadcasting directly from downtown Seattle, Washington, detailing the momentous groundbreaking ceremony for an architectural titan that would forever redefine the city's skyline. A mysterious, rapidly expanding technology and commercial real estate conglomerate known as Thorn Enterprises had just commenced construction on a glittering, billion-dollar obsidian tower that spanned 3 prime city blocks. The digital lower third graphic flashed across the bottom of my television screen in crisp, white lettering. William Thorn, founder and CEO, Thorn Enterprises. He looked profoundly distinguished, possessing the imposing physical architecture of an athlete, with elegant streaks of silver threading through the dark temples of his hair. But as the camera operator zoomed in for an intimate close-up, just as he tilted his head toward the left, my spoon slipped from my fingers, clattering into my soup bowl. Seared into the living flesh of his left chin, situated exactly 3/4 of an inch below the corner of his lower lip, was a thin, jagged white line curved in the precise shape of a crescent moon. The exact surgical scar I had stitched myself with high-tensile nylon fishing line 25 years ago on our kitchen table when my 10-year-old son, Brandon Dawson, split his jaw in a bicycle accident. My son was not dead at the bottom of a river gorge. He was alive, thriving, and building a multi-billion-dollar empire under a fraudulent identity. While I poured the life savings of my retirement into maintaining his widow, while I endured 5 years of psychological isolation and medical abuse under the constant threat of being committed to an asylum, after Monica kicked out my freedom, my son was wearing $5,000 Italian suits and breaking ground on skyscrapers across state lines. "Monica!" I screamed, the sound erupting from my throat with a guttural, terrifying roar of pure, explosive rage that rattled the exposed copper pipes across the ceiling. "Monica, get down here right now." Above my head, the heavy footsteps abruptly halted mid-stride. The heavy wooden door at the landing flew open with a violent bang against the wall, and Monica descended the creaking steps, holding a crystal wine glass between her manicured fingers. Her face wore a look of pure annoyance, her lips pressed into a thin line of absolute contempt at having her peaceful evening routine interrupted by her captive. "What on earth is wrong with you now, Jerry?" she snapped, her voice dripping with venomous condescension as she halted at the bottom of the staircase, resting one hand upon her hip. "You spilled your soup all over your trousers. Look at this disgusting mess upon the floor. You are behaving like an unruly, spoiled child who needs his bedtime bumped up by an hour." I completely ignored her patronizing reprimand, pushing myself up out of the worn armchair with a violent surge of adrenaline that banished the stiffness from my arthritic joints, pointing a trembling, ink-stained finger directly at the glowing television screen. "Look at the screen. Look at that man right there on the podium, Monica. That is Brandon. He isn't dead. Look at the crescent scar upon his chin." I watched her profile with the clinical, merciless gaze of a forensic investigator auditing a fraudulent ledger. I saw the healthy color completely drain from her cheeks in the span of a single second, leaving her skin as pale and waxen as a corpse, as her hand trembled so violently that Pinot Grigio sloshed over her crystal glass. It was not the bewildered confusion of a woman who failed to understand. It was the naked, visceral terror of a professional co-conspirator who realized her master deception had just been exposed under blinding lights. For one brief second, the mask of the saintly daughter-in-law shattered, revealing the calculating freeloader underneath, who recognized William Thorn instantly with absolute dread. "Give me that," she hissed, snapping out of her paralysis with the desperate speed of a cornered predator as she lunged forward, snatching the television remote off the cinder block stand and jamming her thumb onto the master power button. The screen blinked out instantly, terminating the image of my billionaire son and leaving 2 ghostly reflections staring back in the dark glass: an old, betrayed father and a pale, sweating woman whose 25-year financial conspiracy stood upon the precipice of absolute destruction. "Turn it back on right now, Monica," I roared, stepping into her personal space. You have been gaslighting me for 5 years to steal my pension and my home, but the veil is off. You knew he was alive. Monica retreated toward the staircase, her facial features hardening from terrified panic into a mask of pure, glacial granite. There is no William Thorne Jerry, and Brandon died 25 years ago at the bottom of the river gorge, she whispered in a low tone dripping with malice. Your senile mind is manufacturing elaborate fantasies because your brain cells are literally dying. It is the dementia, and you are becoming a dangerous, unmanageable threat to this household. She marched directly across the basement, toward the wall-mounted, steel medicine cabinet, unlocked it with the brass key around her neck, and retrieved an orange prescription cylinder containing heavy industrial sedatives. She shook 2 oblong blue tablets out onto her palm. You need to calm down right now before you induce a stroke. Open your mouth and take your medication immediately. I am not touching another pill from your hands, Monica, I said in a chilling tone. I am going upstairs right now to pick up the kitchen telephone and call the FBI and the police department to report an identity fraud and insurance conspiracy. Sunny Meadows was the ultimate, terrifying threat that hung over my existence, a notoriously corrupt, underfunded regional assisted living facility situated on the industrial outskirts, where inconvenient elderly citizens were abandoned after being kicked out by ungrateful relatives to die in squalor. I looked into Monica's cold eyes and realized she would execute her threat before midnight if I offered physical resistance right now. I had to survive the night and use my 40-year auditing discipline to outmaneuver her. I allowed my shoulders to slump forward, mimicking the defeated posture of a broken old man who had surrendered to his captor's psychological dominance, and parted my lips wide. Monica shoved the 2 massive blue sedatives deep onto my tongue with her index finger before pressing a cup of stale water against my lower lip. I took a deliberate gulp, tilting my head backward with a pronounced swallowing motion, but utilizing a classic sleight-of-tongue technique, I wedged both tablets tightly into the deep buccal cavity between my lower left gum line and inner cheek tissue. Satisfied that the chemical dosage was on its way to my bloodstream, Monica released my jaw with a disgusted snort. Within 15 minutes, the paranoid hallucinations will evaporate, and you will fall asleep, she mocked, pocketing the remote as she ascended the creaking stairs and threw the heavy brass deadbolt into place with a sharp, metallic detonation. The instant the house settled into dead silence, I leaned over the utility sink, dislodged both blue sedatives from my cheek, spat them into the drain, and flushed the industrial chemicals out into the city sewers under high-pressure cold water. When the pale streaks of winter dawn began bleeding through the dirty basement window well, my ears caught the distinct vibration of the automated garage door opener engaging across the breezeway above. It was barely 5 o'clock in the morning. He saw you on the television broadcast last night. William, Monica's voice hissed from inside her sealed luxury sedan, vibrating with acute, desperate terror. I am telling you, he recognized your face right through the screen and screamed about the crescent scar. He knows who you really are. She addressed him exclusively as William, proving she had fully adopted his fraudulent corporate identity while acting as the active, well-paid guardian of his resurrection. I forced 2 blue sedatives down his throat, but he threatened to call the FBI. Monica's voice bordered on hysteria. We cannot afford to wait until next month. He is an active liability. If he breaks out and screams about your real name to a journalist, your entire initial public offering will collapse overnight. We have to accelerate the timeline immediately. Yes, I spoke with the intake director at Sunny Meadows weeks ago. They have a permanent bed secured in their locked memory care ward upon the 4th floor, where they utilize heavy chemical restraints. Once I commit him behind those iron doors, he will never step outside again. But we have to move tomorrow morning. I retreated silently down the stairs, my hands shaking with white-hot fury. My only son, Brandon Dawson, was casually ordering his father's permanent incarceration inside an abusive state-run nursing home, simply to protect his corporate valuation and secure his multi-billion-dollar IPO launch. I waited 45 minutes until the heavy rumbling of the master bathroom shower running upstairs masked the acoustic signature of my movements. I walked to the bottom of the basement stairs and tested the doorknob. To my profound surprise, The brass mechanism rotated freely because Monica had been in such a panicked rush after her garage call that she had forgotten to slide the deadbolt back into place. I pushed the door open, stepped into the bright kitchen, and snatched the primary cordless telephone from the island to dial emergency dispatch. Silence. There was no dial tone, only a dead void following the modular cord toward the baseboard. My blood ran cold. The cord had not been unplugged. It had been severed cleanly in two with a pair of heavy, serrated kitchen poultry shears resting on the drying mat. Checking the time on the dial, Jerry, or trying to order room service. Monica stood in the formal dining room doorway, wrapped in a plush white bathrobe, wrapped in a bath towel, her dark eyes fixed on the severed copper wires, with a cold smirk of absolute triumph. "The clock down there is broken because your mind is completely broken," she patronized, gently plucking the dead receiver from my grip and placing it into its cradle. "We need to have a definitive conversation. Your visual hallucinations are multiplying rapidly, and you pose a severe physical danger to yourself." "I am entirely lucid, Monica, and I know exactly who I saw upon that news broadcast," I stated firmly, straightening my arthritic spine. "I have secured an emergency placement for you at Sunny Meadows," she continued smoothly, ignoring my words entirely. "For the next 24 hours, your signature remains upon the historical deed, but I have an emergency clinical evaluation scheduled this afternoon with Dr. Evans. Once he executes an involuntary psychiatric hold, the probate court will immediately grant me full legal conservatorship and emergency guardianship over your estate. My very first administrative action will be placing this property on the market for an immediate all-cash liquidation sale, consolidating your remaining savings account funds, executing a total withdrawal from your retirement portfolios, and relocating to Seattle permanently while you remain safely locked away inside the memory care ward until the good Lord calls you home." She opened the refrigerator, poured a glass of orange juice, and shook two vibrant turquoise extended-release sedatives out onto her palm. "You missed your scheduled 7:00 a.m. distribution. Open up right now." Recognizing that running outside would only prompt her to dial 911 and have me forcibly injected with Haldol on the front lawn before hauling me to Sunny Meadows in chains, I slumped my shoulders and feigned absolute defeat. She dropped the turquoise tablets onto my tongue. Once again, utilizing my sleight of tongue control, I wedged both pills into my right buccal cavity while simulating a difficult swallow. Satisfied, Monica ordered me back to the basement to pack an overnight satchel for the 8:00 a.m. medical transport van arrival tomorrow morning. The instant the deadbolt slammed locked behind me, I spat both turquoise tablets into the utility sink drain and flushed them out into the sewers. They thought they had corralled a senile retiree, but they had forgotten who lived inside this basement. I walked to the far corner where my rusted four-drawer steel filing cabinet sat beneath a gardening tarp. Dropping to my knees before the bottom drawer labeled 1988 to 1992, closed corporate audits, I reached inside the dark rear cavity, pressed my fingertips against two tiny raised steel rivets, and applied upward pressure. From the concealed metal recess, I retrieved my professional, high-grade forensic lock-picking roll, containing 24 precision stainless steel diamond rakes and torsion tension wrenches, alongside a sealed static bag holding a prepaid untraceable cellular burner telephone purchased with cash 5 years ago. I powered on the burner phone. The small display flicked to life, glowing with a single solid bar. 15% battery remaining, network signal established. At precisely 9 o'clock, Monica's white luxury Mercedes-Benz accelerated out of the driveway, heading toward her high-stakes appointment with Dr. Evans at the magistrate's office. Giving her vehicle 3 full minutes to clear the cul-de-sac, I tucked my lock-picking roll and burner phone into my waistband, climbed the basement stairs, and inserted a stainless steel torsion wrench and diamond pick into the kitchen deadbolt keyhole beneath the door gap. Working the 5 brass pin tumblers with upward rotational shear, I lifted each pin to its shear line, clicked past the 4th spool security pin, and popped the cylinder open. The reinforced door swung wide into the kitchen after 42 seconds of effort. I walked straight upstairs to the primary study, the room that had served as my home auditing office for 35 years before Monica installed a 12-button keypad lever lock and converted it into her private financial command center. Knowing Monica's intense superficial vanity, I pressed the 4 digits of her wedding year. 1994. The LED blinked emerald green, disengaging the electronic latch. Stepping onto the Persian rug, I bypassed the encrypted computer desk entirely and walked toward the north wall where an ornate oil painting of a storm at sea hung upon brass hooks. Lifting the canvas away revealed the matte black steel faceplate of a commercial-grade Sovereign Atlantic wall safe, equipped with a biometric fingerprint scanner and a mechanical dual-key override cylinder. Monica confidently assumed her fingerprints made the safe impenetrable. Forgetting that when our house was built 35 years ago, I had personally supervised its installation and hidden the backup physical key beneath the third oak floorboard inside the built-in closet. Wedging my pocket knife blade beneath the floorboard, I popped the oak plank loose, retrieved the wax paper-wrapped brass master override key, and inserted it into the safe's mechanical cylinder. Rotating the spoke handle downward, retracted the 3-inch steel bolts with a deep thunk. Spreading the ledgers across my mahogany desk under the brass reading lamp, my breathing slowed to a cold stillness. Every single month, upon the first calendar day for 25 unbroken years, an international wire transfer originating from Thorn Enterprises Holdings, Cayman branch, deposited exactly $50, C0, USD, directly into Monica's private offshore numbered account at Sovereign Atlantic. $15 million in untraceable, tax-free offshore hush money. While my late wife had wept herself to sleep mourning our dead son, while I worked 80-hour auditing weeks to pay off his remaining college debts, and while I rotted in a damp basement eating unflavored soup under the threat of asylum commitment after being kicked out of my own study, Monica had accumulated a secret multi-million-dollar fortune in the Cayman Islands. Brandon had placed his own parents under permanent domestic surveillance, hiring his wife to act as warden while they built skyscrapers upon his grave. Turning the page, I discovered a thick, rubber-banded bundle of 40 unmailed, handwritten postcards featuring glossy photographs of the Seattle skyline. I slipped the band off and read the top card dated 3 years ago, in Brandon's distinct right-leaning blue loops. Dearest Laura, happy 25th birthday, my beautiful daughter. I watched you graduate from nursing school, from the balcony of the auditorium last month. You looked so radiant. I am infinitely proud of the woman you have become. I know your mother tells you that I died long ago, and I know your grandfather's mind is failing him, but please know your father is alive, thriving in Seattle, and building a kingdom that will one day belong to you. Be patient just a little longer. With all my love, Dad. My hands shook with violent indignation. Brandon had actively written to his daughter for over a decade. But Monica, driven by her insatiable greed and desperate need for psychological dominance over both her husband's hush money and her daughter's loyalty, had intercepted every single postcard, hoarding them as financial blackmail against Brandon while brainwashing Laura into believing her father was dead and her grandfather was a dangerous, senile madman. Grandpa. I spun around from the desk to see my 28-year-old granddaughter, Laura Dawson, standing framed in the study doorway, wearing wrinkled blue emergency room nursing scrubs with a stethoscope around her neck. Her wide brown eyes were fixed in absolute shock upon my erect posture, clean engineering trousers, and the wide-open steel safe behind me. Grandpa, what are you doing upstairs? Laura stammered, stepping back toward the hallway, while her hand reached toward her cellular phone in her scrub pocket. Mom told me before my shift that your dementia was severe again. She said Dr. Evans was coming to take you to Sunny Meadows today. Do not touch that telephone, Laura, I said in a calm, absolute baritone that halted her hand instantly. Come to this desk right now and look at what your mother has been locking away inside this safe. Laura hesitated, then walked to the desk, where I handed her the bundle of intercepted postcards across the glowing lamp. Her eyes swept across the blue handwriting down to the signature, flipping card after card as tears welled in her eyes. This is Dad's handwriting, she whispered in a ragged choke. I know every curve of his letters from his old college notebooks. But how? Mom took me to his grave upon the hillside every single Memorial Day. He did not die at the river gorge, Laura, I explained gently, placing my hand over hers. He pushed an empty automobile over the cliff to stage a fraudulent insurance claim, collected $2 million from our policy, and fled to Seattle to launch Thorne Enterprises under the name William Thorne. I recognized the crescent surgical scar upon his chin upon the evening news last night, and your mother did not mourn him. She has been receiving $50,000 every single month from his Cayman shell accounts for 25 years. When I recognized his face last night, she went to the county magistrate this morning to finalize an emergency commitment order to lock me inside Sunny Meadows at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, so she can liquidate this house and join your father in Seattle. Laura stared down at the $15 million worth of wire confirmations, her body shaking with profound revulsion as she realized her mother had demanded half her nursing paycheck each month to cover Grandpa's medical expenses while sitting upon a secret offshore fortune. Looking up with tear-filled eyes locked onto mine with fierce protective determination, she wiped her cheeks. We are not letting her take you to Sunny Meadows, Grandpa. We are going to the police station right now with these ledgers to put Mom and Dad in prison. We cannot go to the local precinct right now, Laura, I explained calmly, sealing the postcards and primary Cayman ledgers inside a waterproof manila envelope and tucking it into my waistband. Your mother spent 5 years laying the groundwork for my insanity across this county with medical affidavits from Dr. Sterling and social connections on the hospital board. If we walk into the precinct, they will detain me upon a psychiatric hold and hand these folders back to her as domestic property. To dismantle an empire built across state lines by a billionaire CEO and his co-conspirator, we must strike at the head of the serpent. I must travel directly to Seattle today, infiltrate Thorne Tower before his initial public offering launches tomorrow morning, and confront William Thorne mirror to mirror, where local judges cannot protect him. Before Laura could respond, the sharp crunch of radial tires rolling across the gravel driveway echoed from below the open window, alongside the heavy rumbling of the automated garage doors engaging. Monica had returned early from the magistrate's office. She's back, Laura gasped in terror. Grandpa, if she comes up those stairs and finds the basement door open and this safe unlocked right now, she will call the emergency orderlies immediately. How are you going to get out of the house? I walked rapidly to the large bay window overlooking the backyard garden, unlocked the brass latch, and threw the wooden frame wide open. Outside, dropping 22 feet down to the soft mulched garden beds below, ran a sturdy wrought iron rose trellis secured firmly to the exterior brick wall. I am going down the trellis, I told her, swinging my right leg over the sill. You must remain here right now, Laura. Do not confront your mother about the ledgers yet. If she suspects you are collaborating with me, she will freeze your bank accounts and have you detained as an accessory. Pretend you just walked upstairs to check on the study while I picked the locks downstairs. As I swung my left leg out onto the iron rungs, Laura rushed forward, reached into her scrub pocket, and pressed a sleek, heavy matte black metallic credit card directly into my palm as Monica's designer heels began clicking across the kitchen tile below. Take this right now, Grandpa. Laura insisted urgently. I have $15,000 of available credit saved on this emergency account from my shifts. The 4-digit PIN is my birthday, 0814. Use it to buy bus tickets, clothes, food, whatever you need to get to Seattle tonight. Call me upon my hospital extension the exact second you reach the city. Thank you, my dear, I whispered, placing the black card into my shirt pocket. I will make them answer for what they did to you. I climbed rapidly down the wrought iron trellis, my 71-year-old arms burning with exertion as the cold morning air whipped my face before dropping the final 4 feet right onto the soft, dark mulch below, landing with a practiced bend of my knees. Above me through the open window, the heavy oak door burst wide open, followed instantly by Monica's high, furious shriek echoing out into the morning air. Laura? What in God's name are you doing inside my study? Where is the wall-safe painting? And why is the basement door open downstairs? I did not wait to hear Laura's brave, feigned response. I sprinted across the backyard lawn, vaulted over the 4-foot boundary fence, separating our property from the alleyway, and ran into the dense suburban shadows just as the church clock began tolling 10 in the morning. 20 hours remaining, I was out of the basement, armed with $15 million of forensic evidence, and headed straight for Seattle. At 12:30 in the afternoon, after boarding a regional express transit coach using Laura's matte black hospital credit card, I stepped out onto the rain-slicked pavement of downtown Seattle. Before approaching my son's corporate fortress, I stopped at a high-end clothier near the financial district, purchasing a sharp charcoal wool suit, a crisp white Oxford shirt, and polished leather Oxfords. With my graying hair combed back and my posture erect, I no longer looked like the ragged, shivering freeloader Monica had locked away in a damp basement after she kicked out my freedom. I looked every inch the seasoned, formidable federal forensic investigator who had dismantled corporate fraud rings for 40 years. I walked 3 blocks west until the towering obsidian monolith of Thorn Tower rose above me, its 40-story glass facade reflecting the heavy gray clouds. Bypassing the primary security turnstiles, by slipping into the private executive elevator bank behind a group of distracted board members, I pressed the illuminated button for the 32nd floor, the executive suite of Thorn Enterprises. Stepping onto the plush carpet of the 32nd floor, I moved past the outer reception desks and entered the expansive, marble-clad executive washroom situated opposite the boardroom. I locked the outer mahogany door behind me, washed the travel dust from my hands, and waited. Precisely 4 minutes later, the brass doorknob turned, the door swung open, and William Thorn stepped alone into the washroom, adjusting his silk necktie in the panoramic mirror. I stepped out from the alcove of the marble stalls, my reflection appearing directly beside his in the silvered glass. For 3 suspended heartbeats, William stared at my mirrored image. His dark eyes widened with paralyzing shock, his breathing halted mid-stride, and his right hand froze against his silk tie. "Hello, Brandon," I said softly, my voice carrying the steady weight of 25 years of grief and betrayal. "You built a very tall tower on top of an empty grave upon the hillside." Brandon spun around to face me, his back slamming against the marble counter as his facial features twisted from shock into a mask of pure, unyielding venom. There was no remorse in his eyes for the tears his mother had wept until her dying breath, and no gratitude for the decades I had spent clearing his college debts. He straightened his designer jacket, looking down at me with the glacial arrogance of a billionaire dictator who believed himself entirely untouchable. "What in God's name are you doing here, old man?" Brandon hissed, his voice dropping into a menacing register. "How did you get out of that basement?" Monica explicitly assured me you were heavily sedated and secured behind locked doors until the transport van hauled you to Sunny Meadows in the morning. "I picked the locks, Brandon," I replied calmly, stepping closer until 2 feet separated us. "Just as I audited your wife's wall safe, I read your 40 intercepted postcards addressed to Laura. And I examined the offshore ledger confirmations from Sovereign Atlantic, proving you wired Monica $15 million in hush money across 25 years, while she fed me unflavored soup and drugged my drinking water to steal my pension after she kicked out every right I possessed." Brandon let out a cold, mocking laugh, his lips curling into a cold smirk of absolute contempt. $15 million is pocket change, father. It was a minor operational overhead expense required to keep you quiet and isolated while I constructed an empire worth $3 billion. I am William Thorn now. The financial markets worship at my feet, and tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, my initial public offering will make me one of the wealthiest men in the Pacific Northwest. You are dead to me, Jerry. Brandon Dawson died in that river gorge, and you are just a senile, trespassing old ghost whose mind has completely eroded. I am going to the federal authorities, Brandon, I stated without flinching. I am turning over your Cayman banking records, your original dental records, and the exact surgical measurements of your crescent scar to the FBI Wire Fraud Division tonight. I am going to strip this false identity off your back before your opening bell ever rings. Brandon's eyes darkened to pitch black. You aren't going anywhere, old man, he snarled. Before I could anticipate his movement, he grabbed a heavy, solid brass soap dispenser resting upon the marble counter and swung it with brutal, vicious force across my left jaw. The metallic impact exploded with blinding pain, driving me backward across the wet tile until my shoulder crashed into the stall partition. Blood filled my mouth instantly as my arthritic knees buckled beneath me. Before I could recover my footing, two corporate private security guards in charcoal tactical suits burst into the washroom responding to the crash. Brandon pointed a finger at me where I lay bleeding on the floorboards, his posture immaculate and composed. This disoriented, trespassing beggar bypassed lobby security and assaulted me in the washroom. Brandon commanded coldly, "Drag him down the service stairwell and throw him out into the back alleyway, and confiscate anything in his pockets." The two guards grabbed me roughly by my underarms, hoisting my bruised frame off the tile with bone-jarring force. But as they dragged me backward past the sink vanity toward the heavy exit door, I executed one final, desperate sleight-of-hand maneuver born of my covert field training. Reaching into my watch pocket, my bloody fingers extracted a miniature, high-frequency acoustic transmitting bug, a self-adhesive covert listening device, from my forensic toolkit. As my right hand brushed against the underside of Brandon's private mahogany washroom credenza, I firmly planted a tracker and listening node flat against the hidden wood grain right beneath the trim, where visual inspection would never find it. "Throw him out in the rain where he belongs," Brandon sneered, turning his back to me to check his appearance in the mirror. "And by tomorrow noon, make sure Monica has him permanently strapped to a locked bed in Sunny Meadows after being kicked out onto the streets." The private security guards dragged me down 32 flights of concrete service stairs and hurled me violently out through the heavy emergency exit doors into the rain-swept brick alleyway running behind Thorn Tower. I hit the cold, wet asphalt on my side, my ribcage aching and a deep cut above my lip bleeding freely onto the lapel of my new charcoal suit. I lay in the freezing rain for 2 minutes, spitting blood into the street gutter while regulating my breathing. My physical body was battered and throbbing with acute pain, but my mind was burning with cold, white-hot clarity. I reached into the inner pocket of my suit jacket, retrieved my prepaid cellular burner phone, and plugged the tiny, single-ear acoustic monitoring receiver wire into the headphone jack. I pressed the earbud deep into my right ear canal, turning the volume dial to maximum sensitivity. Because the high-frequency transmitter was secured directly beneath the mahogany credenza in Brandon's private washroom, just 20 feet from his office door, the acoustic feed captured every single word spoken within his inner sanctuary with crystal clarity. I heard the sound of his office door opening and closing, followed by the heavy creak of his leather executive chair and the crisp clicking of his private desk telephone dialing an encrypted satellite number. A moment later, the deep, rough voice of his chief private security contractor, a former mercenary named Vance, answered the line. "Is the situation contained at the tower?" Vance asked over the encrypted frequency. "The old man showed up here 40 minutes ago," Brandon's voice answered, vibrating with cold, murderous urgency. "He bypassed lobby security and confronted me directly in the washroom regarding the Cayman Island accounts and the River Gorge accident. We threw him out into the alleyway after he was kicked out by my guards, but he is no longer just a passive, senile nuisance we can manage from a distance. He possesses physical copies of the offshore wire confirmations, and he explicitly threatened to walk directly into the federal building to request a forensic identity audit before our morning bell. Do you want my field team to intercept him on the street tonight?" Vance asked coldly. "No, I want the problem eliminated permanently at both ends," Brandon commanded without a single shred of hesitation or familial mercy. "Listen to me very carefully, Vance. First, dispatch your tactical unit directly to my old suburban cul-de-sac right now. Break into the house and locate my daughter, Laura. She knows too much, and if the old man shared the ledgers with her, she will testify against our IPO. Make her elimination look like a tragic, late-night emergency room mugging gone wrong during her shift transition. No witnesses, no loose ends." I froze in the freezing rain, my heart nearly stopping as my son ordered the execution of his own 28-year-old daughter simply to protect his corporate balance sheets. "And what about your father?" Vance inquired. "Contact Monica immediately," Brandon ordered. "Tell her to accelerate the emergency medical transport from Sunny Meadows right now. I don't care what Dr. Evans or the magistrates say. Bribe the intake orderlies at the memory care ward to pick him up off the streets tonight. Once they get him behind locked doors on the 4th floor, I want them to administer a lethal chemical overdose of industrial thorazine and potassium chloride. documented in the institutional medical charts as a sudden fatal cardiac arrest brought on by severe senile dementia and exposure. I want him dead and cremated before the opening bell rings, at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. The line disconnected with a sharp electronic click. I pulled the earbud from my ear, leaning against the damp brick wall of the alleyway as the rain soaked through my shirt. My own flesh and blood had just signed my death warrant and ordered the murder of my granddaughter. I had less than 18 hours to destroy his empire completely before his hitmen reached Laura at the county hospital. As I pushed myself up from the wet asphalt, the powerful, deep purr of a high-performance 12-cylinder engine echoed from the entrance of the alleyway. A sleek midnight black stretch executive limousine glided smoothly over the wet cobblestones, halting directly in front of me with its headlights piercing the gloom. It was Arthur Wallace, 68 years old, the brilliant veteran real estate financier who had originally co-founded Thorn Enterprises alongside Brandon 15 years ago before being ruthlessly betrayed, framed for accounting discrepancies, and kicked out of the board by my son's cutthroat machinations. "You look like a man who just had a disagreeable conversation with William Thorne, Mr. Dawson," Arthur Wallace said softly, gesturing toward the warm interior of the limousine. "Get inside right now. We both have a mutual score to settle with your son, and we only have until midnight to burn his kingdom to the ground." I climbed inside the warm, leather-appointed rear command center of Arthur Wallace's limousine as the heavy door sealed shut behind us, isolating us from the pouring rain. Arthur handed me a clean linen towel to wipe the blood from my chin alongside a hot cup of black coffee. Spread across the mahogany conference table between us sat 3 high-speed encrypted laptop terminals linked directly to the Pacific Northwest financial markets and the corporate registry databases. For 10 years, I have watched William Thorne build an empire upon the bones of my reputation, after he squeezed me out of our partnership, Arthur Wallace explained, his eyes burning with furious analytical resolve. I knew his balance sheets were inflated, and his initial public offering was built upon a fragile house of cards, but I never possessed the empirical forensic proof required to breach his legal firewalls, until my surveillance team spotted you entering the tower with those Cayman banking ledgers. "He isn't just a corporate fraud, Arthur," I said, laying my waterproof manila envelope upon the table and withdrawing the red accordion folder of sovereign Atlantic wire confirmations alongside the 40 intercepted postcards. "He is my son, Brandon Dawson. He staged his death 25 years ago, collected a $2 million insurance claim, and has been paying his wife Monica $50,000 every month to keep me locked in a freezing basement eating unflavored soup while he prepared this IPO. And 10 minutes ago, I overheard his encrypted orders. His contractor Vance is dispatching hitmen to murder my granddaughter Laura at the hospital right now, and bribing orderlies to kill me inside Sunny Meadows tonight." Arthur's facial features hardened into iron. "Then we don't just stop his IPO, Jerry. We dismantle his financial liquidity completely before his opening bell ever sounds." For the next 4 hours, sitting side by side inside the mobile command center as the limousine circled the rain-swept streets of Seattle, Arthur and I executed a masterclass in forensic financial warfare. Utilizing Arthur's deep institutional connections with Wall Street short sellers and elite financial journalists, we systematically leaked the authenticated Cayman Island routing numbers and evidence of active federal wire fraud investigations directly to the primary market makers. Within 45 minutes, panic spread through the after-hours trading desks. Thorne Enterprises futures plummeted by 18% as institutional investors began desperately hedging their positions against tomorrow's launch. At 7 o'clock in the evening, my burner phone earbud still, receiving the live acoustic feed from the listening device, planted right inside Brandon's suite picked up urgent, heavy footsteps. Brandon had just convened an emergency, clandestine executive conference inside the cellar, the high-security, soundproof subterranean private dining room located directly beneath Thorne Tower. "Why are our stock futures hemorrhaging in after-hours trading?" Brandon's voice roared over the transmitter, his composure shattering under the sudden financial assault. "Who leaked our Cayman branch account structures to the press?" "We don't know, Mr. Thorne." His chief financial officer, Marcus, responded with trembling panic. The market makers are getting spooked by rumors of an impending SEC audit. If our valuation drops another 10% before midnight, our underwriting banks will exercise their emergency escape clauses and cancel tomorrow morning's $8 billion IPO entirely. They will not cancel this IPO, Brandon shouted, his voice vibrating with desperate, tyrannical madness. Marcus, execute an immediate emergency wire transfer right now. Pull $200 million directly out of the Sentinel Trust escrow accounts and use it to buy up our own stock futures through our shell brokerages to artificially prop up the share price before the morning bell. Mr. Thorne, we can't do that. Marcus gasped. The Sentinel Trust is our primary corporate pension and employee healthcare liability reserve. It is strictly protected by federal ERISA statutes. If we divert those $200 million and the market discovers it, that isn't just civil breach of contract. That is 20 years in federal prison for massive fiduciary embezzlement. Do as I command right now, Marcus, or you are fired before breakfast. Brandon screamed. Initiate the $200 million wire from the Sentinel Trust to our Cayman clearing accounts immediately. I will authorize the transfer keys from my personal terminal. I pulled the earbud from my ear, looking right across the conference table at Arthur Wallace, with a cold, triumphant smile. He just committed the ultimate white-collar felony on a live audio feed, Arthur. And because he is executing the electronic transfer directly through the Thorne Enterprises master accounting server, he is exposing his primary routing gateway. Reaching across the table to Arthur's high-speed encrypted terminal, I logged directly into the Thorne accounting architecture, utilizing the master administrative backdoor credentials I had uncovered during my inspection of Monica's home study ledgers that morning. As a senior forensic auditor who spent 40 years tracking digital currency flows across international firewalls, navigating Brandon's corporate routing tables was like reading an open book. At precisely 7:42, the digital confirmation screen upon our terminal flashed red. Incoming wire transfer detected. $200,000 in Sentinel Trust pension reserves. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard with blazing, merciless speed. I intercepted the outgoing digital packets right at the primary clearing gateway, stripped away Brandon's Cayman shell account destination numbers, and rewrote the final settlement routing instructions with absolute precision. With one decisive strike of the Enter key, I redirected the entire $200 USD transfer away from Thorne Enterprises and sent it clearing irrevocably and permanently into the Master Charitable Endowment Trust account of the Seattle Children's Hospital, the very hospital where my granddaughter Alora worked her exhausting shifts saving lives. Transfer complete, Jerry, Arthur Wallace said, watching the confirmation receipt print out with deep, profound satisfaction. You just turned your son's illegal $200 million market manipulation into the largest permanent pediatric healthcare donation in Pacific Northwest history. Once those funds settle in the hospital endowment, federal banking laws make them completely unrecoverable by corporate creditors. Simultaneously, my burner phone vibrated upon the mahogany table. It was Laura calling upon her encrypted hospital extension. "Grandpa, are you safe?" Laura's voice asked breathlessly. "I'm calling from the locked hospital security office. Right after you left the house down the trellis this morning, I accessed Mom's computer upstairs in the study and successfully installed a remote keylogger program right onto her hard drive. I have been monitoring her keystrokes all day from the emergency room." "What did you capture, Laura?" I asked urgently. "Everything, Grandpa," Laura cried out with fierce triumph. I captured her complete, unedited email correspondence with Dad dating back 10 years, detailing their exact conspiracy to keep you drugged with blue sedatives and locked in the basement. I captured her digital signatures authorizing Dr. Evans to commit you to Sunny Meadows tomorrow morning. And 2 minutes ago, I intercepted an email from Vance's security team. They attempted to track my hospital badge to ambushing me in the parking garage. But because I saw their names on Mom's email logs, I alerted hospital armed security and the county police. Vance's hitmen were just arrested in the lower hospital driveway with silenced weapons in their trunk. "You are a brilliant girl, Laura," I said, tears of fatherly pride welling in my eyes. Stay inside the locked hospital security office right now with the police officers. Arthur and I are heading directly to the Seattle Art Museum ballroom right now. We are going to meet your father face to face under the bright lights of his midnight black tie gala. At 11 o'clock that evening, the grand ballroom of the Seattle Art Museum was transformed into a glittering sanctuary of wealth and power. Over 800 elite guests, including city council members, international investment bankers, venture capitalists, and high society socialites, were assembled under crystal chandeliers for the midnight black tie gala, celebrating the imminent launch of the Thorn Enterprises' initial public offering. Waiters in white jackets circulated with silver trays of champagne, while a massive, high-definition 40-foot projection screen, suspended above the main stage, displayed the glowing, golden corporate crest of Thorn Enterprises. Arthur Wallace and I bypassed the crowded main entrance by presenting Arthur's founding board credentials to the service staff, making our way quietly up the private spiral staircase into the second-story audiovisual projection booth, overlooking the entire ballroom floor. From our elevated vantage point, we watched as William Thorne, immaculately dressed in a fresh bespoke tuxedo, showing absolutely no physical sign of our violent washroom confrontation earlier that afternoon, stepped confidently onto the center of the stage beneath the blinding spotlights. The audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. Brandon raised his hands, smiling with magnetic, charismatic charm as the room quieted. Distinguished guests, partners, and friends. Brandon began, his resonant baritone vibrating through the massive ballroom sound system. We stand tonight upon the threshold of an extraordinary financial milestone. For 20 years, Thorn Enterprises has been built upon the bedrock of absolute integrity, unwavering transparency, and the self-reliant vision of creating enduring value for our community. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, when our opening bell rings across the stock exchange, we will not merely launch an initial public offering. We will cement a permanent legacy of trust and prosperity for generations to come. From inside the darkened projection booth, I looked at Arthur Wallace and nodded once. Cut his microphone, Arthur, and fire the projection feed. Arthur threw the master override switch upon the audiovisual control console. Down upon the stage, Brandon's microphone cut out instantly with a sharp electronic screech. Before he could turn toward the sound technicians in annoyance, the 40-foot projection screen above his head flickered violently from the golden Thorn Enterprises crest to crisp, digitized high-definition video footage retrieved from the State Highway Patrol archives, the 1999 River Gorge, bridge toll and security camera footage. The entire ballroom fell into dead, breathless silence as 800 affluent guests watched the screen. Displayed in high resolution was the unmistakable figure of 25-year-old Brandon Dawson, stepping out of his sedan on the rain-swept bridge, 48 hours before his supposed death. The camera captured him meticulously, placing a heavy brick onto the accelerator pedal, shifting the transmission into drive, and calmly stepping backward as his empty vehicle plunged over the concrete guardrail into the rushing river gorge below to execute his $2 million insurance fraud. Before the crowd could recover from the visual shock, the ballroom speakers crackled to life, broadcasting the crystal-clear, high-fidelity audio recording captured by my covert washroom bug just 4 hours earlier. Listen to me very carefully, Vance. Brandon's own voice echoed thunderously across the 800 guests, filling every corner of the museum ballroom. First, dispatch your tactical unit directly to my old suburban cul-de-sac right now. Break into the house and locate my daughter, Laura. Make her elimination look like a tragic, late-night emergency room mugging gone wrong during her shift transition. No witnesses, no loose ends, and tell Monica to accelerate the emergency medical transport from Sunny Meadows right now. Once they get him behind locked doors on the 4th floor, I want them to administer a lethal chemical overdose of industrial thorazine. I want him dead and cremated before the opening bell rings at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. A wave of collective, horrified gasps and terrified murmurs swept across the ballroom floor. Champagne glasses slipped from the hands of wealthy socialites, shattering against the marble floors. Turn that screen off right now. Brandon screamed into his dead microphone, his immaculate executive poise completely disintegrating into feral, panicked madness as he lunged toward the stage curtains. "Shut off the power, it's a deep fake. It's a fraudulent conspiracy." Before he could reach the edge of the stage, the heavy double oak doors at the rear of the grand ballroom burst wide open with a violent, thunderous crash. Over 24 federal agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime and Violent Fugitive Task Force, accompanied by armed United States Marshals and Securities and Exchange Commission enforcement officers wearing protective tactical vests, swarmed down the center aisle with their service weapons drawn. "Federal agents, nobody move." The lead FBI supervisor roared over a tactical bullhorn, pointing his weapon directly at the stage. William Thorne, also known as Brandon Dawson, you are under arrest for federal insurance fraud, interstate money laundering, embezzlement of $200 million from the Sentinel Trust, and conspiracy to commit premeditated capital murder. Get down upon the stage right now with your hands behind your head. Brandon stumbled backward, his knees trembling violently under the blinding flashes of dozens of press cameras and cell phones, capturing his catastrophic downfall. Two burly federal marshals vaulted onto the stage, grabbed his arms, forced him down face first onto the polished wood right beneath his towering 1999 fraud video, and locked heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists with a sharp, definitive click. From the second-story projection booth, I stood beside Arthur Wallace, looking down at the stage. My 40-year career as a forensic investigator had culminated in this single, absolute triumph. The false king was stripped of his crown. His $3 billion empire was shattered into dust before the opening bell ever rang, and my granddaughter was safe. 1 week later, on a crisp, bright winter morning, I sat inside the high-security concrete visiting room of the Federal Detention Center in downtown Seattle. Separated from me by a thick, reinforced pane of bulletproof partition glass sat my son, Brandon Dawson. He wore a faded orange prison jumpsuit, his wrists bound by heavy steel chains secured to a belly chain, and his face looked haggard, unshaven, and completely hollowed out by the agonizing reality of his federal indictment. When he looked across the table and saw me sitting calmly on the visitor's stool, dressed in my clean charcoal wool suit with my posture erect, his arrogant demeanor completely collapsed. Tears welled in his dark eyes, and he leaned forward against the reinforced glass, speaking through the metallic intercom, grating with a ragged, desperate choke. "Dad, please," Brandon begged, his voice trembling with broken desperation. "You have to help me, Dad. You spent 40 years navigating federal court ledgers and criminal statutes. You know how these prosecutors work. If we go to trial, they are going to bury me in a federal maximum security penitentiary for the rest of my natural life. Monica has already turned state's evidence against me to save herself from the murder charges. You are my father, Dad. You sutured my chin when I was 10 years old. Please, use your forensic expertise to untangle these accounting charges and get me a plea bargain." I looked at him through the thick partition glass, without a single drop of sorrow or paternal weakness. "You forfeited the right to call me your father 5 years ago, Brandon," I said in a cold, steady baritone that carried the absolute finality of a gavel striking wood. "When you ordered me locked inside a freezing basement, fed unflavored soup, and drugged with turquoise sedatives under the threat of being thrown into sunny meadows while you built skyscrapers with your hush money, you severed our family bonds forever. And when you ordered your contractor Vance to murder your own daughter Laura in a hospital parking garage after she was kicked out of her inheritance, you destroyed any remaining shred of mercy on this earth." Reaching into my leather briefcase, I pulled out a thick, legal document bound in blue covers alongside a crisp, glossy 8x10 photograph, and slid both items through the narrow metal transaction slot beneath the glass partition directly into his chained hands. Brandon looked down at the documents. The primary document was not a legal defense brief or a judicial plea bargain petition. It was a comprehensive, absolute legal conservatorship and estate forfeiture agreement, accompanied by a total disinheritance clause and irrevocable property transfer deed. By signing upon the dotted line, Brandon Dawson would legally strip himself of every remaining frozen bank account, corporate asset, offshore trust fund, and property title registered under both his real name and William Thorne, transferring 100% of his liquidated wealth directly and exclusively into a secure, protected trust fund established for his daughter, Laura Dawson, right after he was disinherited from any family standing. Why would I ever sign away my remaining assets to Laura? Brandon stammered, his hands shaking against the paper. If I sign this, I will be left completely destitute. I won't even have the funds to hire private defense attorneys for my trial, because if you do not sign that property transfer right now, Brandon, I said coldly, pointing my finger directly at the glossy 8x10 photograph resting beneath the legal documents, I am turning this physical evidence over to the federal prosecutor handling your capital murder indictment before noon today. Brandon stared down at the photograph. It showed a rusted, heavy-duty metal mechanics toolbox resting inside the trunk of his old 1999 sedan. The vehicle state troopers had recovered from the river gorge 25 years ago. I audited the physical evidence locker from your 1999 accident report this morning, Brandon. I lied smoothly, executing the ultimate psychological bluff born of my 40-year auditing career. That heavy toolbox recovered from your trunk was found to contain biological traces, zip ties and blood-stained canvas bags. If I hand over my forensic report certifying that you utilized those tools to premeditate violent felonies prior to your disappearance, the federal prosecutor will elevate your current charges from conspiracy to premeditated capital murder with special circumstances. Under federal sentencing guidelines, that does not mean life imprisonment, Brandon. That means the federal death penalty by lethal injection. Brandon's eyes dilated in sheer, suffocating terror as he stared at the photograph of the old toolbox. His arrogant mind, shattered by his public downfall and terrified of the execution chamber, completely broke under the weight of my bluff. He did not realize that the photograph simply depicted his old, harmless set of teenage bicycle wrenches. He believed his own dark web of lies had finally trapped him in a capital cage. Sobbing uncontrollably, Brandon dropped to his knees right upon the cold, concrete floor of the visiting room booth. Gripping the chained pen attached to the transaction slot, with trembling, desperate fingers, he signed his full legal name across every single signature block of the conservatorship and estate transfer deed, surrendering his entire worldly fortune and confirming he was disinherited completely before sliding the executed documents back across the counter. I signed it, Dad. I signed everything over to Laura. Brandon wept through the intercom grating, his forehead pressed against the reinforced glass, as he begged for mercy upon his knees. Please don't give the toolbox report to the prosecutors. Please let me live. I picked up the signed, notarized estate transfer deed, verified his signatures with a forensic glance, and placed the document securely into my briefcase alongside the toolbox photograph. Enjoy your retirement in the penitentiary, Prisoner Dawson, I said, quietly, standing up from my stool and turning my back upon him forever as the armed prison guards entered the booth to haul him away to his cell. 2 days later, back upon our suburban tree-lined cul-de-sac, 2 county sheriff's deputies and federal marshals arrived at our brick property holding emergency legal eviction and asset seizure mandates. Monica Dawson, stripped of her designer clothes, her cashmere cardigans, and her $15 million of frozen Cayman accounts after being disinherited by judicial order, was led out of the front door in handcuffs and kicked out onto the street, weeping in humiliation before the watching neighbors as she was transported to the county jail to await trial for felony elder abuse, domestic poisoning, and financial conspiracy. With the proceeds of Laura's newly secured trust fund and the complete restoration of my unhindered pension and savings accounts, my granddaughter and I initiated an immediate, comprehensive renovation of our family home. Together, standing in the bright morning sunlight, Laura and I took heavy crowbars and ripped the heavy, reinforced brass deadbolt right off the kitchen landing door. We carried the heavy wooden basement door out into the center of the backyard garden bed, where Monica had once plotted my asylum commitment, chopped the timber into pieces with a fire axe, and cast the wood directly into a roaring stone fire pit, alongside the old toolbox photograph and every single orange pill bottle we found upstairs. Standing by the warmth of the fire pit, as the smoke drifted up into the clear Pacific Northwest sky, with my arm wrapped proudly around Laura's shoulders, I looked out across our restored property with profound peace in my heart. We had survived the dark basement. We had defeated 2 calculating freeloaders who attempted to bury us for greed, and we had transformed our suffering into enduring justice. To ensure that no elderly citizen across our state would ever again be isolated behind locked basement doors, fed unflavored slop, or threatened with chemical commitment by ungrateful relatives, Laura and I formally established the Dawson Advocacy Group, a nonprofit, federally funded legal and forensic auditing foundation dedicated to investigating elder financial abuse, protecting retirement pensions, and prosecuting suburban gold diggers to the absolute fullest extent of the law. Thank you for listening to my truth and following our journey from the shadows of that damp basement to the restoration of our family legacy. If this story of forensic persistence, family loyalty, and ultimate justice resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and comment below to share your thoughts and support the Dawson Advocacy Group as we continue fighting for truth, dignity, and justice across our community.